On today's video, we are talking about the things you should know and ask when buying a property in Chicago in order to avoid buying a lemon. The last thing you want to do is to close on a home and realize that you didn't ask the right questions before buying that home, and now you are stuck with a lot of incurred costs and liability. Thanks again for being back on the channel. My name is Jordan Pyle and I'm your go-to Chicago realtor, servicing buyers, sellers, and investors downtown in the city of Chicago. If you have any questions about the real estate market here locally, or maybe you're moving from another city into Chicago, feel free to reach out down below. I have a real estate strategy call link and would love to chat with you about your real estate goals. Without further ado, let's get on into the video. So I've been selling real estate now for 8 years downtown in the city of Chicago, and I've learned some of the most important questions that we need to make sure we're asking when we're going and touring properties, whether you're with your realtor or you're by yourself checking out open houses. We're going to run through these 5 most important questions that, like I said in the intro, will avoid you to buying a lemon of a property. All right, first up on the list, we are talking about how old are all the major mechanicals and the components, as well as the appliances. So these are going to include things such as your furnace, your AC unit, your water heater, obviously your refrigerator, dishwasher, stove, microwave, things like that. These are often going to be some of the largest potential expenses down the road if these need to be replaced. So we just want to understand what the condition is, when the last time they've been serviced, and if there's any issues with any of these major components. So by definition, as long as these are operable at the time of the inspection, after you go under contract, then the seller isn't responsible for replacing these or even giving you a credit for these. So if you have a 20-year-old furnace, you know that it's pretty much at the end of its useful life, and there's some different things that you can do to make sure that you're not having to come out of pocket for that full expense. And typically what I will recommend is that my clients or my buyers get a home warranty to cover the major mechanicals and the appliances in an umbrella policy. So what this will do is if you go a year after closing and it's the next winter, for example, and your furnace goes out, as long as you have that home warranty in place, which could run you anywhere between, let's call it $500 to $1,200 for the year, as long as you have that in place, typically there is some fine print and details around these home warranties. So just want to make sure that you're going to be covered in the case that something like this happens. But a furnace and an AC unit, I just had one quoted the other day, for the furnace brand new is going to cost you about $3,500 for the unit and the install. Obviously these range in quality and size. They can go anywhere from $2,500 all the way up to way higher than that, let's just call it. And then your AC unit is also a pretty large expense. And then your water heater might run you between $750 and $1,000. So these are things that you just don't want to be coming out of pocket. So the home warranty is typically what I would recommend. All right, so the second thing that I want to talk about is basically, are there any rental restrictions or is there a rental cap in the building? This is something that I talk about with all of my buyer clients actually at the very first conversation that we have, or what I would like to call the buyer consultation. And this is important because we want to understand what this buyer's long-term goals are and what your long-term goals are for the unit that you're purchasing. And where I'm going with this is you want to ensure, in Chicago at least, you're not really dealing with a lot of single family homes. So I'm really kind of aiming this towards the Chicago market, talking about condos where you might be owning a unit within a building with other unit owners. So what you want to understand here is that in any case, let's just say, for example, you get a job offer in California and you're forced to have to move, or you decide that you want to move, the last thing you want to do is close on a property and then be forced to sell it a year or two down the road when you go and transfer yourself to California. So you just want to understand, can I go and rent this unit out if I were to leave or move out of this unit? And maybe you're not moving across the country, but maybe you're just wanting to buy something else because of change in your life. Maybe you're growing your family, you need more space. And what I always recommend is to make sure that you can buy into a building where maybe there is a rental cap and maybe that cap hasn't yet been met. So kind of a classic example here is a 3-unit building where typically the 3 unit owners are all owner occupied. But let's just say that 2 of them are owner occupied and 1 of them is rented. There might be a cap of 50%, basically saying that only 1 unit can be rented. So if you go to want to rent your unit out in 3 years, but somebody else already is renting their unit, then that could be an issue and you might be forced to sell, where now you're going to have to incur the closing costs for both the purchase and the sale. And typically I always like to ask, what is your timeline for this investment? If it's 3 to 5 years minimum, then I would say it makes sense to go ahead and buy the property. But if you know in a year you're going to be moving, then unless you're buying something that you can hold for certain after you move out, then I would say it probably makes sense for you to continue to rent. So just understanding the rental cap and the rental restrictions is going to be super important. And the last thing I'll say on that is sometimes the rental restrictions, they limit the use of short-term rentals or Airbnbs. And that is very common in Chicago. They're starting to crack down on Airbnb properties. So you just want to make sure that you're asking these questions about rental cap and rental restrictions before you go under contract on a home here in Chicago. All right, the third question that I'd like to ask, and this is going to be in relation to the exterior of the building. So most buildings in Chicago are either all brick buildings or they're a combination of brick and some other stone or commonly split face block. And what we want to understand here is if it's an all brick building, you want to ensure that the tuck pointing was done in the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years. And are there any plans for future tuck pointing? And basically what tuck pointing is that's all the different mortar within the joints of the bricks. They basically go and they re-caulk and they re-tuck point those. And typically the routine maintenance on tuck pointing is between 5 and 7 years. So let's just say you're buying a property and they're like, yeah, the last time the building was tuck pointed was 8 years ago. You know now that that's going to be something that's coming down the pipeline. And you just want to ensure that this is not being basically deferred to you as the new buyer. And if you understand that something like this might be a potential, you want to basically negotiate that with the seller so that they cover this cost, or maybe they put some money in escrow so that when that project actually occurs, you have some money to tap and you're not coming fully out of your own pocket. Then we also talked about the ceiling. And if it's not a brick building, or if it's a combination of brick and oftentimes you might have like a block or like a split face block on the side of the building, brick on the front and the back, the ceiling of the block, basically what you're wanting to ensure here is that that is being done again every 5 to 7 years. And what this can cause if you don't keep up with this routine maintenance, it can cause water to seep into the pores of the split face block, which can ultimately cause a lot of damage in water and mold and things like that. And as soon as that happens in your building, it's going to be very, very hard for you to sell your unit. So understanding when the building was last tuck pointed or sealed, and if there's any routine maintenance that might need to be done. Sometimes there's things called spot tuck pointing where it's not the full tuck pointing of the building, but there might be an issue around a window or a door frame or something like that. You just want to really understand all these ins and outs of the condition of the exterior brick or block of the building. All right, the fourth question, we were talking about special assessments, and the exact question you want to ask is, are there any current, pending, or planned special assessments? You might be asking, what is a special assessment? So pretty much all buildings in Chicago, let's just use that same 3-unit building example, they have what's called a reserve account. So every single month when you are contributing your monthly HOA or your homeowner dues, let's just say it's $150 a month per unit. Basically a small portion of that is going to go towards the actual operating account or the reserve account of the building. And think of this exactly as that, which is an operating account. And essentially what you want here is that a little bit over time, and a lot of people, they want to see at least 10% of the monthly HOAs going to this reserve account to account for any routine maintenance for smaller items and projects that might need to be done around the condo or the building. Typically when I'm helping a buyer, I like to see in a 3-unit building like this, somewhere between about $1,500 and $2,000 per unit to just ensure that there's an adequate amount in there. And the smaller the building, it's a self-managed association typically, and there's 2 different philosophies. Either, hey, let's jack up the HOAs so every single month you're paying a little bit more to really cushion and pad that reserve account, and then when the bigger projects come up, there's more money in there to tap so that you don't have a special assessment. The other school of thought is that let's keep the assessments as low as possible so that every single month it's a little bit more affordable, and then if any big projects come up, we just know that we might have to come out of pocket for these expenses. And this is what you would call a special assessment. So let's just use the example of the building needs a brand new roof. And let's use that same 3-unit example, and let's just say there's $6,000 in the reserve account, but the roof is going to cost $20,000 in order to get it replaced. So most buildings, they're not going to want to go and just drain the reserve account. They may take a small percentage of that and apply that to this big expense, but typically what they're going to do is they're going to raise a special assessment. And what this means is basically each owner, based on the total amount of the project, so that same $20,000, their unit percentage or their percentage of ownership in the building. And typically not all the units are the exact same size. So maybe one unit owns technically 33% of the building and the other 2 units make up the difference to complete the 100% of the building. So that $20,000 is going to be prorated by the percentage of the building that you own. As you can see, if there's a $20,000 expense for a new roof, this can get pretty costly. So if you are going into a real estate transaction, you're getting ready to make an offer on a property, and they say, yes, there is a special assessment in place, pending or planned in the next 2 fiscal years, your agent should basically be putting forth a request for the seller to cover that cost. And there's a lot of different ways that we can kind of structure that. Sometimes it's a credit, sometimes it's an escrow, and sometimes there's a various combination of that in order to make sure that you're not incurring that full liability and cost down the road if they know that that project is going to happen in the next 2 fiscal years. All right, so the fifth and final question, I just kind of covered it a little bit, but how much money is in the reserve account? So just to kind of recap that, I like to see basically anywhere between $1,500 to $2,000 per unit. If it's a small association, a lot of times that could be lower. If it's a larger building, you want to see that number being pretty big. But in general, the reserve account is just the operating account for the building, and you just want to basically get an overall assessment of the general health of the building, and the reserve account is typically a good indicator on what that is. So those are the 5 questions that you need to know and that you want to ask before you're actually making an offer on a property here in Chicago to avoid buying a lemon. So if this has been helpful to you, these are just some of the things that I advise my clients on when we're going out and looking at properties. A lot of times if I'm with them, I am the one asking these questions, but maybe you're going through an open house. I would guide you and advise you to make sure that you're asking these questions, get a general feeling of how good or how bad this real estate investment might be for you. So again, if this has been helpful, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this video. We're going to be releasing more content like this throughout all of 2022. So we're going to be coming out with 2 videos every single week talking about all things Chicago real estate and living and working in Chicago. So if that is something that's interested to you, go ahead and smash that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video.